Hello and welcome back to the channel. So it is time for a build update on the 1981 BMW R100CS. Quite a lot to get through in this video, but we are getting so close now. So close. I can taste it to that first startup and that first ride. There's still quite a few things to get done. There's obviously a lot of things that could still go wrong. So we're not going to start counting our chickens just yet, but we are, if things go according to plan, getting ever closer to that big moment. So keeping everything crossed. Now, in the last session in the garage, it was all about electrics. So that's what this video is going to be about in terms of the main part of the video. We'll just talk you through everything that happened there, the things that went right and things that went not so right. But we're almost there with the electrics now. And by means of a very quick recap in terms of where we're at, if you missed the last video, the carburetors are now back on the bike. So the two Bing constant velocity carbs that were completely stripped. They were aqua blasted. They had all the new stuff put inside them. So new floats, new seals, new diaphragms, all the hardware has been replaced. And I also went ahead and did the conversion on these carburetors to a manual choke pull. It just gives it a little bit of a cleaner look and removes some of the cables and things like that. And you'll also be very pleased to know, if you watched the last video, that I have since gone through all of the hose clamps and made sure that all of the screws are aligned in the same direction. Somebody pointed that out. In fact, a couple of people pointed that out in the comments, and I 100% agree with you. It's just sloppy. They've got to all face the right way. Don't know how I missed that, but now all is right with the universe. They're all perfectly well aligned. Now I could go ahead and just hide these and flip them around underneath the hoses and things like that, but I actually don't mind them being on show. So we'll just kind of leave it at that for now. Now we had the failed attempt to fit the old style airbox conversion, and that's because my 1979 starter motor cover, which was a sand cast version of that cover, doesn't want to play ball with my crankcase. It doesn't want to fit properly, so it's going to need a little bit of modifying to get that to seat properly on top of my crank. I didn't want to force it, didn't want to try and bend anything, so I'll just get the inner lip of that just machined back slightly so that it sits nicely on top of my crank. And then at some point I will do that old style airbox conversion with the clamshell style and all that, because I just think it looks more classic BMW. But for now, we've got the period correct 1981 airbox on there. That's all refitted with the original starter motor that came with the bike, starter motor cover that came with the bike, and the flat style airbox. It's all on, and we are all set in terms of that side of things. So onto the electrics. This has been something I've been looking forward to for a while. It's just one of those things that you've got to get done, and it's really important to do it properly. But it's just one of those jobs I think I've possibly been putting off for a little while. But thankfully, there isn't a huge amount to worry about, because the electrics on these old airheads are pretty straightforward. There's not a huge amount to it. Now, you might have seen the video where I did the full alternator rebuild. So stripped that, cleaned it all out, made sure that was good, and put that back on the bike. I also changed all of the wires that join the alternator up to the diode board, so they're the three-phase AC wires that go up to the diode board, and then all the little subloom that goes from the diode board into the regulator and all that. So there's been quite a few bits and pieces that have been replaced in terms of the core components, but thankfully the main loom itself seems to be in good condition. There was no major issues with the electrics when I took it off the bike, and I didn't go ahead and completely disassemble it from all of the circuitry inside their headlight shell. I just kept it all in one piece. But even if I had to take it apart, looking at how the boys in Berlin designed this thing, it actually seems quite straightforward. So everything terminates inside the headlight shell. You can see here we've got this circuit board, and there's little zones on that circuit board that are color coded. They all correspond to different colored wires inside the loom. So all you need to do is just look at the color on the wire, and that tells you where it should go on the circuit board, and you just plug it in. It's really that straightforward. So actually, it's a pretty simple system. Now, to get it back on the bike, we start with the headlight. So my loom and my headlight are all kind of one piece because I didn't take it apart. So I put the headlight in place first. That's pretty straightforward to do. We just kind of spread out the two ears that are connected to the stanchions to give us a little bit of space. We've got the ignition barrel that slots through on the left-hand side, and then on the right-hand side, There's this nice shiny steel washer that I've replaced and a nice polished bolt which goes through and secures it in place. And then we just kind of close off the space and then just tighten it up with the big nut over on the left-hand side of the bike with the ignition barrel poking through. So all pretty straightforward to get it on the bike. There's a little stack of shims and rubber washers that you need to make sure are in place, and that just deals with any vibration and makes it a little bit easier to move the headlight and get it aligned when you're out and about on the road. So with the headlight on, it's just a case of then taking a step back and having a bit of a think about where everything needs to go, just loosely at this stage. So we've got a few parts of the loom that are going to come up to the handlebars, and those include things like the switchgear panels. So we've got one that connects to the left-hand side of the bike, which deals with things like the horn, our indicators, and the lighting setup. So your kind of full beam flasher and all that kind of stuff. That's there on the left-hand side. And it's just a case of a single screw that connects that in place onto the handlebar controls there. And then over on the right-hand side, obviously, it's the starter button and the kill switch and all that kind of stuff. So and again, it's just one screw, just bolts it in place. Then we have a couple of other little cables that run down from each side of the handlebars. We've got on the left-hand side our clutch sensor switch, and then we've got our brake light switch that comes out of the brake lever as well. And again, just making sure they're routed nicely along the handlebars and dropping down, not getting caught up in the steering or anything like that. So when it comes to fitting the main loom itself, what we need to do is kind of thread it underneath the lower part of the triple and then somehow kind of maneuver it and manipulate it past the headstock and align the bulk of the loom up with the kind of central spar on the frame. Now, getting this through the headstock and keeping it clear of all the components like the steering damper requires a little bit of back and forth just to make sure that everything's safe, we're not interfering with the steering, and obviously making sure that as you're passing it through, you're not accidentally pinching things or we haven't got plugs getting caught up and we're not forcing anything. I did actually have to pop off the little ball and socket joint from the steering damper, just move the loom out of the way and then reconnect it because I wasn't 100% happy with how I originally put the loom on the bike. So I've justified the loom ever so slightly to the right hand side of the bike just to steer well clear of the steering damper, which is kind of biased towards the left hand side of the bike. So just little things to think about in terms of making sure things don't get caught up and pinched and all that kind of stuff. So with the loom successfully threaded through the headstock, we can now start thinking about how we're going to connect all the individual components up to that. And as I said, most of those components have been replaced. So I firstly connected the new regulator, which has got a couple of bolts which connects it to the front of the frame here on the right hand side of the bike. Then moved on to the starter relay, and again that's been replaced. Now when I took the bike apart, I actually had to take out the central pin from the terminal block for the starter relay because it connects to a different part of the circuit in the bike, so had to take that out in order to be able to remove the main loom. Now, doing that, I obviously damaged the spade itself and wanted to replace that. So I went ahead and put a new spade on there. But unfortunately, the spade I put on there was not compatible with the terminal block. So trying to get it to click in and stay there just wasn't working because my spade didn't have the little hook on it, which was needed for this particular block. So that was annoying. I had to cut it off, put a new one on there with the hook. And now that clicks in there perfectly. And our starter relay has got a little bracket where it just screws into the frame, which keeps it perfectly in place and stops it flapping around. The only other couple of plugs you've got to think about there are the connections from both the clutch switch and the brake light, which both go into little terminal spades down here on the front section of the loom. And they just kind of nestle underneath the main spar of the frame quite nicely out of the way. So just kind of mapping out where they go. We also have the subloom for the instrument cluster as well. So we've got to make sure that that's kind of loosely in place at this stage too. So that's all sorted. Then towards the back of the bike, we've got the new coil as well. This replaces the two big 6-volt Bosch coils that were on this bike. Massive, great big things they are. They've now come off and I've replaced that with this 12-volt coil. So it's a single unit that deals with both of the sparks for both of the cylinders. So a much tidier solution. It comes with this awful bullet style connector. Thankfully, I was able just to rip that off and plug that directly into the loom with the same spades as per the Bosch coils as well. So that's a nice tidy solution there. The next thing to then think about, of course, is our ignition control module, and that sits up on top of the brake line splitter, which sits on the front of the frame up on this main central spar. So that will eventually be under the petrol tank, obviously. To fit that onto the bike, there's a steel hose clamp, which we need to take apart and then reconnect. And then we can position our brake line splitter onto the frame of the bike. And of course, messing around with these steel hoses is always a load of fun. They're an absolute flipping nightmare once you've taken them apart to get the worm screw to properly engage with the grooves on the band itself so that it's winding through and tightening properly. Just a bit of a faff, but eventually we got there. Once the brake line splitter was back in place on the top of the frame, I then just put a little bit of thermal paste on the top plate here where the ignition control unit will sit eventually. That's just to deal with some of the heat that's going to be generated by that unit. It gets really, really hot, so we just want to make sure that we've got some thermal paste there to deal with that. Once that's done, drop on the ignition unit, and there's 2 M4 bolts that hold that in place, so nice and easy. We've then got the plug that is secured in place with a little steel bail, so that clicks in nicely, and that plug itself is connected down to the bean can on the front of the bike, which of course is our electronic ignition timer, which is running off the crank. So with all of that done and minimum cable ties, it's looking like a really neat little setup. Actually, I'm really happy with how all that's gone. So hopefully when we test everything, we won't have any problems and we can keep everything as it is. But we'll kind of get to that point in the next episode of this installation. The other thing that I had to do was sort out the rear brake light switch, and all of that is brand new. When I sent the frame off to get powder coated, unfortunately I left the brake light switch on there. Just forgot to take it off, so that's long gone, as is the little cable that connects it to the main part of the loom as well. So I've replaced that. We've got a new brake light switch. Connecting the loom to that is as simple as 2 little bare wires that are screwed down onto the brake light switch, and then they connect to the main part of the loom. Then the other thing I had to do was go ahead and just reconnect the rear lighting loom, and that's all been serviced as I took all the indicator and tail light assembly apart to replace the indicator bracket with this new stainless steel one. So that's all now sorted as well. So everything is connected up. We've got things kind of loosely in place. We haven't done all of the finalization in terms of the routing. I'm sure things will change a little bit as other components start to get introduced to the bike. Things like all the clutch cables, throttle cables, speedo cables, all that stuff that needs to kind of go and exist in harmony with the loom. So things may change a little bit, but for now, we're probably 90% there in terms of the positioning of all of those different components. The headlight shell is back on for now, and all we've got to do is get the battery charged up, get it connected, and just make sure everything works. And then, of course, we will be ready to press that red button and see if this thing starts up. So loads of stuff to test, loads of stuff to figure out, and we're not far away from getting to that point. In the meantime, small little update. So the new luggage system has arrived. We've got 2 great big Krauser boxes, which are going to sit on the original BMW style luggage racks that I've already got on the bike. So one of those is just temporarily on at the moment, and they look absolutely brilliant. So happy with those. Got loads and loads of space for going out on trips. And of course they are period correct. They look brilliant. So these are Hepco and Becker remade versions of the original Krauser panniers. And I've actually got a set of BMW panniers that the bike came with, but they're all cracked up and rusted and rattly, and I don't trust them. So really, really good to have a set of luggage on this bike now, which not only looks correct, but is just so much better built than those original panniers, like the way they connect onto the back of the bike. I'll do a video kind of showing you how all of that system works at some point in the future. But for now, they are looking great. So really happy with that. There's still a few things to do before we get too carried away with thinking about things like first startups and all that. We've still got the brakes to do. So brand new braided brake lines to go on. I've obviously got to pressurize that system and check everything. There's been loads of work that happened on the brakes. They've all been completely rebuilt. So again, we just got to make sure everything's good there. The back brakes as well, got to do the brake lever and all the linkage for the rear drum brake. So that's all got to go on. Then I've got to do all the linkage and set up for the rider pegs and the gearbox linkage and all that, the shifter. So that's all got to get sorted. And then we're into putting the paint on. So we've got to get the rear seat back on the bike. So we've got all new hardware for that, all the little screws and things to get the cowl connected back to the seat. That's all got to get done. Got to get the fuel tank on. And then we've got to faff around with getting that fiberglass front fairing back on. Hopefully without causing any damage, because you've got to stretch it a little bit over the indicator brackets. It's all a little bit terrifying, but fingers crossed that will go without hitch. We'll see. So still quite a few things to get sorted. And of course, I'll keep you posted on the channel with progress. That's it for now. Until the next one, ride safe.